On the morning of October 12, 1988, a landlord used a master key to enter apartment 4B of a quiet, unremarkable building. The tenant, a man named Leo Vance, was 2 weeks behind on rent and had not answered the phone. Inside, everything was in its place. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of a hasty departure. There was only a single leather-bound journal, left open on a small wooden desk. The final entry, dated September 28th, contained just 7 words. "I have to see what's inside." Leo Vance was gone. To this day, no one knows what he went to see or if he ever returned. Leo Vance had been a man defined by quiet precision. For 12 years, he had worked as a special collections archivist for the city's historical society. His colleagues recalled a person who was polite but distant, someone who preferred the company of decaying documents to that of other people. He was meticulously organized, a trait that governed both his professional life and his sparse, orderly apartment. He had few friends and no known family in the state. His life, as far as anyone could tell, was a closed loop between his small apartment and the silent archives downtown. Investigators who later tried to piece together his social circle found almost nothing. He was a ghost in his own life, long before he physically vanished. The police, who first entered his apartment, noted the profound sense of order. Dishes were clean and stacked, clothes were folded in drawers, and books were arranged on shelves, not by author or title, but by publication year. It was the home of a person who craved control and structure. This made the open journal on his desk all the more conspicuous. It was an island of unresolved narrative in an ocean of meticulous closure. The journal itself was unremarkable in its appearance, a simple black leather-bound book with unlined cream-colored pages. But inside it contained a map of a man's descent into an obsession that apparently consumed him. For nearly a year, Leo had chronicled his thoughts and activities in a small, neat cursive that remained unnervingly consistent until the very last pages. The first 100 pages or so were mundane, almost painfully so. They detailed his work at the archive, notes on cataloging Civil War-era correspondence, observations about the weather, and critiques of books he had read. These early entries painted a portrait of a lonely but stable intellect, a man content with a life of quiet observation. There was no hint of the strangeness that was to come. The shift began on November 4th, 1987. On that day, Leo wrote about a collection of uncatalogued materials he had discovered in a mislabeled crate in the archive's sub-basement. It contained the personal effects of a 19th-century surveyor named Alastair Finch, a man who had been commissioned to map the remote, unpopulated ridges of the Blackwood State Forest, some 50 miles north of the city. Among Finch's tools and faded maps was his personal diary. Leo noted in his own journal that Finch's entries started with professional observations about topography and geology, but grew increasingly erratic. Finch wrote of what he called acoustic dead zones, pockets of land where sound seemed to vanish completely. He described a profound and unsettling silence that was not merely an absence of noise, but a presence of its own. Leo Vance, the archivist, initially treated this as a historical curiosity. He recorded Finch's strange observations with professional detachment. He speculated that Finch might have suffered from an undiagnosed medical condition or simply the psychological strain of prolonged isolation in the wilderness. He was a man of facts and records, and he sought a rational explanation. However, his professional interest slowly curdled into personal fascination. He began to cross-reference Finch's maps with modern topographical surveys. He spent his lunch breaks researching 19th-century audiology and the history of the Blackwood region. His journal entries, once focused on his daily routine, began to fill with notes and theories about Alastair Finch's unnatural silence. By January of 1988, the obsession had taken root. Leo wrote of his first weekend trip to the Blackwood Forest. He followed Finch's crude maps, searching for the locations mentioned in the surveyor's diary. He found nothing out of the ordinary, yet he described a feeling of being watched, a sense of unease that clung to the air in the deep woods. He dismissed it as imagination, but the seed of doubt had been planted. His entries through the spring and summer of that year chronicled a man living a double life. By day, he was the quiet archivist. On weekends, he was an amateur explorer, a paranormal investigator chasing the ghost of a long-dead surveyor. He bought camping gear, advanced compasses, and audio recording equipment. His neat apartment began to house a small, organized collection of wilderness survival tools. The tone of the journal shifted. The detached academic language was gradually replaced by something more personal, more urgent. He wrote less about the historical record and more about his own experiences in the forest. He claimed to have found one of Finch's dead zones. He described standing in a small clearing where the sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, and even the sound of his own breathing seemed to be swallowed by an invisible void. "The silence is not empty," he wrote on June 12th. "It is dense. It has weight. When you stand within it, you feel it pressing on you. It is not an absence of sound, but a negation of it." His scientific instruments, he reported, registered nothing unusual. His audio recorders picked up only faint, ambient static. The phenomenon, he concluded, was something that could only be perceived, not measured. His colleagues at the Historical Society later told police that they had noticed a change in Leo around this time. He had become more withdrawn, if that were even possible. He seemed tired, distracted, and occasionally agitated. When asked, he would offer a vague excuse about a personal research project. No one pressed him for details. Leo Vance had always been a man who kept to himself, and his privacy was respected. Inside the pages of his journal, however, his isolation was taking a different form. He wrote of a growing conviction that he was on the verge of a significant discovery. He believed Alastair Finch had not gone mad, but had instead stumbled upon a natural, or perhaps unnatural, phenomenon that defied explanation. He felt a kinship with the dead surveyor, seeing himself as Finch's intellectual successor. By August, his trips to Blackwood Forest were no longer confined to weekends. He began calling in sick to work, fabricating excuses to spend more time in the woods. His journal entries grew longer, more detailed, and more speculative. He started documenting strange dreams he was having, dreams of vast, silent landscapes under a starless sky. He described a specific location he had begun to call the locus. According to his notes and hand-drawn maps, it was a small, shallow cave set into a rock formation deep within the forest, miles from any marked trail. This cave, he believed, was the epicenter of the acoustic anomaly. It was here, he wrote, that the silence was most profound, most absolute. On September 15th, he wrote, "Finch was wrong. The silence isn't a zone, it's an emission. It emanates from a source. I believe the source is inside the locus." He described his attempts to explore the cave. He wrote that it was shallow, barely a recess in the rock, and appeared to terminate in a solid wall of stone just a dozen feet from the entrance. Yet he became convinced that the rock wall was an illusion. He wrote of a faint vibration he could feel when he pressed his hand against the stone, a low, subaudible hum that his recording equipment could not detect. He believed there was something beyond the rock, a space from which the silence was broadcasting. The final 2 weeks of entries were sparse and frantic. The neat, controlled cursive began to fray at the edges. The words slanted and hurried. He wrote of spending days at a time camped near the cave, watching and listening. He mentioned a growing sense of imminence, a feeling that something was about to happen. On September 25th, he recorded a breakthrough. "The vibration is a frequency," he wrote. "It is not constant. There is a pattern, a rhythm. It is like a key, and I am beginning to learn the shape of the lock." This entry was filled with strange diagrams and what appeared to be mathematical notations, none of which corresponded to any known principles of physics or acoustics. His second-to-last entry, dated September 27th, was just 2 sentences. "The wall is not rock. It is a door that does not wish to be seen." There was a sense of terrifying discovery in those words, the culmination of his year-long obsession. He offered no further explanation, and then came the final entry, dated the following day, September 28th, 1988. 7 words that served as his final communication with the world. "I have to see what's inside." After that, the pages were blank. The pen he had been using was placed neatly beside the open journal, and Leo Vance was gone. His absence was not noticed for 2 weeks. When the landlord finally opened the door, the apartment was cool and silent. A layer of dust had begun to settle on the furniture. A half-eaten sandwich on a plate in the kitchen had grown mold, suggesting he had left in some haste, a detail that contradicted the otherwise orderly scene. His wallet, keys, and passport were on the kitchen counter. His car was still in its assigned parking space. The police were called and a missing persons investigation was opened. They found no signs of foul play. The door and windows were locked from the inside, with the landlord's entry being the only one recorded. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no disturbed furniture. It was as if Leo Vance had simply evaporated from his own apartment. The journal immediately became the centerpiece of the investigation. Detectives read through it, attempting to construct a timeline and understand the victim's state of mind. They followed the maps he had drawn and, with the help of park rangers, located the area he had dubbed the locus. The shallow cave was exactly as he had described it. Forensic teams examined the cave and the surrounding area. They found a small, abandoned campsite nearby, consistent with Leo's descriptions. They discovered a few of his personal items, a water bottle, a discarded food wrapper, and a tripod for his audio equipment. But they found no audio recorder, no camera, and no sign of Leo himself. The rock wall at the back of the cave was inspected. It was, geologists confirmed, a solid wall of granite, part of a much larger ancient rock formation. There were no hidden passages, no secret doors, no hollow spaces behind it. Sonar and ground-penetrating radar confirmed this. The wall was exactly what it appeared to be, an impassable barrier of stone. There was no vibration, no hum, no anomaly of any kind. The acoustic dead zones that both Leo Vance and Alastair Finch had described could not be replicated. Investigators and audio technicians spent days in the area with sensitive equipment. They recorded the normal ambient sounds of a forest, wind, birdsong, the movement of animals. There were no pockets of unnatural silence. The central pillar of Leo's obsession appeared to have no basis in physical reality. The investigation turned back to the man himself. Financial records showed that Leo had withdrawn a small but significant amount of cash, $500, the day before his final journal entry. It was a modest sum, not enough to start a new life, but enough for a short journey. Yet his car had not moved, and there was no record of him purchasing a bus or train ticket. The money was never found. Detectives delved into the life of Alastair Finch, the 19th century surveyor who had started it all. They discovered that Finch had indeed died in the Blackwood Forest, but historical records stated his death was the result of a fall from a ridge during a storm. His diary, which had been returned to his family, mentioned odd sensations but was interpreted by historians as the poetic ramblings of a man suffering from exhaustion and isolation. There was no mention of a cave or a vibrating wall. Witness testimony, as is often the case in such mysteries, only served to deepen the confusion. A hiker came forward, claiming to have seen a man matching Leo's description on a trail near the area of the cave around the 28th or 29th of September. He said the man seemed disoriented and was talking to himself. However, the hiker could not be certain of the date, and his description was generic enough to match any number of people. A more unusual account came from a truck driver who frequently used a service road on the forest's edge. He reported seeing a man standing by the side of the road late one night, staring up at the sky. He claimed the man was wearing clothes similar to those Leo was thought to have owned. The driver slowed down, but the man made no move to flag him down, and he drove on. Again, the timeline was fuzzy, and the identification was uncertain. The official search for Leo Vance lasted for several weeks. Search and rescue teams, aided by dogs and helicopters, scoured the Blackwood Forest. They found no body, no clothing, no further trace of the missing archivist. The forest floor, covered in a thick blanket of autumn leaves, yielded no secrets. Eventually, the active search was called off. Leo Vance's case was moved from active to cold. Another file in a cabinet of unresolved disappearances. Music. With the failure of the official investigation to produce any answers, theories began to emerge. The first and most pragmatic theory was that Leo Vance had staged his own disappearance. He was a man with no close ties, a loner who could easily slip away without causing much disruption. The journal, according to this theory, was a deliberate fabrication, a piece of fiction created to send investigators on a wild goose chase into the forest while he started a new life elsewhere. Proponents of this theory pointed to his meticulous nature. Such a man, they argued, would be capable of planning a disappearance with the same precision he applied to arranging his books. The $500 in cash could have been for initial travel expenses. The fantastical story in the journal provided the perfect cover, an elaborate misdirection designed to focus attention on a remote patch of woods. However, there were significant problems with this explanation. Why would he leave his passport and all his identification behind? Starting a new life without these documents would be incredibly difficult. Furthermore, what was his motive? There was no evidence of debt, no legal trouble, no secret relationship he was running to or from. His life was solitary and stable. The idea that he would suddenly abandon it all without a clear reason seemed inconsistent with his character. Moreover, the journal itself felt too genuine to be a simple hoax. Over the course of a year, he had filled hundreds of pages with a narrative that showed a gradual, believable descent into obsession. To fake such a detailed psychological journey would require the skills of a novelist, something the quiet archivist had never shown any indication of possessing. The effort involved in creating such a detailed and consistent fiction seemed disproportionate to the goal of simply disappearing. The second major theory was that Leo Vance was a victim of foul play. Perhaps he had stumbled upon something illegal in the woods, a hidden drug operation, or a poacher's camp, and had been killed to ensure his silence. The Blackwood Forest was vast and remote, an easy place to hide a body. The journal, in this scenario, was simply an unfortunate coincidence, its strange contents unrelated to his actual fate. This theory accounted for the suddenness of his disappearance and the fact that no trace of him was ever found. A person who intended to commit a crime would have little trouble overpowering the solitary, unathletic archivist. The assailant could have then disposed of his body and any incriminating evidence, leaving behind only the mystery of his last written words. But this theory, too, was plagued by a complete lack of evidence. The extensive police search of the area had turned up no signs of any criminal activity. There were no hidden camps, no disturbed soil, no evidence of a struggle at his campsite or near the cave. Furthermore, if he had been murdered, why was his apartment left untouched? A killer might have searched his home for information about what he knew, but the scene was pristine. The foul play theory remained a possibility, but one without a single piece of physical evidence to support it. This led investigators to the third and perhaps most compelling theory, that Leo Vance had suffered a severe psychological breakdown. The journal was not a hoax, but a genuine and tragic record of a man losing his grip on reality. His obsession with Alastair Finch and the acoustic dead zones was a symptom of a developing psychosis, possibly schizophrenia, or a schizotypal personality disorder. According to this interpretation, the strange phenomena he described were not real. The silent zones, the vibrating wall, the patterns in the hum, these were all hallucinations, delusions constructed by a mind under immense stress. His increasing isolation would have amplified these symptoms, creating a feedback loop where his research confirmed his delusions, and his delusions fueled his research. His final entry, "I have to see what's inside," was not a statement of intent to enter a physical place, but a reflection of his psychological state. He was about to cross a final threshold into a full-blown psychotic break. In this state, he could have simply wandered off into the vast wilderness, disoriented and confused. He would have quickly succumbed to the elements or to an accident, his body lost to the forest forever. This theory aligned well with the available evidence. It explained the increasingly bizarre journal entries and the fact that none of the phenomena he described could be verified. It accounted for the witness sighting of a man who appeared disoriented. It also provided a plausible, if tragic, explanation for his disappearance without requiring elaborate conspiracies or unknown assailants. It fit the narrative of a lonely man whose mind, his only real companion, had ultimately betrayed him. Yet even this theory left nagging questions. Leo had no prior history of mental illness. His work required focus and attention to detail, traits he reportedly maintained until the very end. Could such a severe break occur so suddenly and without more obvious warning signs to his colleagues? And there was the matter of the half-eaten sandwich and the cash withdrawal. These suggested a degree of planning and lucidity that seemed at odds with a complete psychotic episode. Finally, there was a fourth, more esoteric theory, one that investigators dismissed, but which has persisted among those who study the case. This theory proposed that Leo Vance was not delusional. It suggested that he, like Alistair Finch before him, had actually discovered something real in the Blackwood Forest, a phenomenon that existed outside the current understanding of science. Adherents to this fringe theory took Leo's journal at face value. They believed that the cave was, in fact, a doorway to another place or another dimension, and that Leo had somehow figured out how to open it. His final entry was literal. He saw a way inside and he took it. He had not died in the forest, nor had he run away. He had simply left. This explanation, of course, relied on speculation and a belief in the paranormal. It offered no testable hypotheses and had no physical evidence to support it. It was more of a ghost story than a credible theory. However, for some, it was the only explanation that honored the strange, methodical narrative that Leo Vance had so carefully constructed in the pages of his journal. It provided a conclusion, however fantastical, to a story that otherwise had none. What remains undisputed is the set of contradictions that lie at the heart of this case. There is the contrast between the rational, orderly man and the irrational, obsessive quest he documented. There is the conflict between the detailed, sensory descriptions in his journal and the complete lack of any corroborating physical evidence in the forest. His home was a place of control, but his mind had ventured into a territory of profound chaos. The Journal of Leo Vance has since become a minor legend in circles dedicated to unresolved mysteries. Its pages have been digitized and analyzed by countless amateur sleuths online. They debate the meaning of his cryptic notations, trace and retrace his hand-drawn maps, and propose new theories. The journal has transcended its origins as a piece of evidence and has become a work of accidental literature, a found document horror story whose power lies in its ambiguity. Was Leo Vance a methodical planner who crafted the perfect exit narrative? Was he an unlucky victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was he a troubled soul whose mind fractured under the weight of loneliness and obsession? Or was he a genuine explorer who discovered something so profound that it removed him from our world entirely? Each theory reshapes the story. In one version, he is a mastermind of deception. In another, a tragic figure of mental collapse. In a third, a hero of a story we can't comprehend. The empty apartment, the silent forest, and the open journal offer no definitive answers. They only provide the framework for questions that continue to echo decades later. The silence that Leo Vance pursued in the Blackwood Forest ultimately became the defining feature of his own legacy. It is a silence born not of an absence of noise, but of an absence of answers. The trail he left behind was not one of footprints, but of words on a page, and that trail led to a solid wall of rock, an impassable barrier, and then it simply stopped. The final chapter of his story was never written. What do you think really happened to Leo Vance? Was the journal a chronicle of a real phenomenon, a descent into madness, or an elaborate fiction to cover a disappearance? Share your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy unresolved mysteries like this, like the video and subscribe for more.